well, you know what I mean. Rumi Pancheva from University of California at Santa Cruz, although at the moment in Los Angeles. And so I know some of you are way out east in far eastern time zones. So for example, Elena is in Vladivostok. And so I think we have the longest time change distinction between speaker and member of the audience. That's a pretty big one. At the school in the past has done this, has taught with us more than anybody. She has permanent tenure with the NYI. Not that there is such a thing. I think you invented that thing. And was with us many times in person and also has been with us teaching many times here in the virtual space. And now is back to give a general lecture on numeral variations, which she's going to tell us about. And we will start in 1 second. But we are going to record the lecture for those who can't make it, which we're going to do in 1 second. Vinny is going to do that. You ready to roll? Yeah. So we're delighted. Thank you, Rumi, for doing this. Take it away. We'll usually take questions at the end, but if anyone has a question during the talk, just put up your little hand and we'll have a discussion afterwards. So please welcome Rumi Pancheva from
Thank you. Thank you so
Cruz.
much, John, for inviting me. And I love the school, so I take any opportunity that when I'm asked to say yes. So you're doing an amazing job. And thank you all for coming from all over the world in various time zones. So let me share my screen. Okay, hold on. Is it working?
Yeah, seems to be your desktop.
Yes, but this is not what I want. Okay, now it should be.
There it is.
Right?
Yep. Yep, perfect.
Okay, so the goal of my talk is to discuss the syntax and interpretations of phrases like two cats. And initially, we might think, okay, this is too small of a structure to allow us to have a whole lot of interesting cross-linguistic variation. Languages should be more or less the same, how they express the concept of counting. But it turns out that there is extensive cross-linguistic variation, both at a very macro level and also micro variation in the structures and interpretations of numerals combining with nouns. And in my talk, I'm going to focus on two specific questions. There are many, many other interesting things that one could discuss in the domain of numerals. But for today, it will be the syntax and lexical semantics of numerals of two, and the nominal number that we see on cats, in this case, in English, the plural. And so the questions I'll be asking is, what is the lexical semantics of numerals of two? Are they modifiers, similar to adjectives? Like two cats, is it similar to black cats? Or are they number denoting? What is the syntax of numerals? Are they adjective-like, like black in the case of cats, or are they determiner-like, more like some? And for the number marking that we see on cats, is it interpretable, this plural? If so, how do we interpret it? Is it just syntactic agreement? And then we'll ask questions about the position within the noun phrase. Where is this number encoded? Below the numeral, above the numeral? And all of these questions have been addressed in the literature before. What I think I am contributing here is that I show that there is a systematic link between the syntax semantics of numerals and number marking. So I'll be answering this question to the affirmative, and I will be showing you the way I think makes sense to do that. And so here are the contributions. So numerals, some select numerals are in fact adjective-like, and they have modifier semantics. The rest of the numerals are determiners, and they denote numbers. Determiner numerals are arguments of two types of null measure heads that connect the determinal numerals to the nouns. And then number marking is interpretable. We have two number heads below and above the numeral. And the grammar of numerals and number marking are linked to a wider monotonicity constraint on measure expressions. So the syntax and semantics, even though there is great variation among the languages, they look the way they are because they are linked to this wider constraint that also regulate how the syntax of 2 pounds of rice, for instance, is encoded. And so let's start. We'll start with the macro variation. It is very, very important to acknowledge and to take this as our starting point that not all languages have numerals. By this, I mean words that express precise numbers. Other languages that do have such words for precise numbers have obligatory classifiers, linkers that link the noun to the numeral. And then there are languages like English that don't have obligatory classifiers. So what is it about this variation? So in terms of availability of numerals, prime example is a language like Munduruku from the Tupian family in Brazil. It does not have precise numbers. It has words that can be translated as close to 1, close to 2, close to 3, and so on, but none of them, including the 1 and the 2, are precise, meaning that they can be used when we have more. The word for 1 can be used when we have more than 1 elements, like 2 cats, and the word for 2 can be used when we have 3 cats. So no word for precise numbers. What does this tell us? I find interesting and promising approach is that numerals have a number denoting root. They denote numbers. So the root for 2 in English or in other languages would be denoting the concept 2. And then a lexical semantic explanation for this variation. Lexicons do not need to contain roots denoting numbers. They may, as let's say in languages like English or Turkish. They don't have to, as let's say in languages like Munduruku and many of them like that. And we have to remember that the acquisition of numerals in languages that have them is slow. It takes time. It takes about 4 years for children to learn the meaning of 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they learn the meanings of those items in that precise sequence. And so they may have the lexical item 4 very early, but they don't reliably pair that item 4 with 4 items. So then to the other division, the need for classifiers to link numerals and nouns. So we have languages like Bangla, in which you have to say to classifier, a linker student, language like Turkish, where such a classifier is optional, and of course in English, where we don't have any such linkers linking to students. So what is that variation about? A very prominent view about languages like English that don't have obligatory classifiers is to say that numerals in those languages are predicates or predicate modifiers. So to is very similar in a sort of abstract way to an adjective like black. And so when you have 2 cats, you're talking about the quantity of cats, and when you have black cats, you're talking about the quality of the cats. But ultimately, the 2 are very similar. And of course, just like adjectives combine directly with cat, nouns in the languages that have obligatory classifiers are different from the nouns in languages they don't. So for instance, in Mandarin, where you have to say three classifier pen, this is because the word for pen does not denote the same thing that the English word pen does. It denotes a kind. And so in order to be, you cannot count kinds. In order to be, you have to count individuals. And so the classifier is taking the kind term and making it appropriate to be counted, to combine with the numeral. But the numeral does not need to be different from the numeral in English. However, there has been another view that says, well, not really, the classifiers are for numerals, and that opens the possibility that numerals in classifier languages are number denoting. Remember, this is the view that we started with when we talked about language like Munduruku. Why does it not have precise numbers? Because it doesn't have words that denote numbers. And so 3 in Mandarin on that view is denoting the number 3. And then the classifier is needed because you cannot link otherwise a number 3 with the meaning of the noun. So, and then there is the other view that says classifiers are both for numerals and for nouns. We encode a lot into the lexical semantics of the classifier, right? So here in 12b, the noun is, in this case, kind denoting in Mandarin, the numeral denotes 3, and the classifier brings them together. That's why it is obligatory. So now we go back then, this idea now of a linker between the numeral and the noun, and the starting point that what could account for Munduruku is the absence of words for precise numbers, opens up the possibility that even in languages like English, the numeral 2 is not like an adjective, not like black or long, but it is like it's a number denoting. And so if it is a number denoting, then we need a linker, just as we do in classifier languages, also in a language like English. And the idea has been suggested before in the literature, and we will call this linker a measure, now measure head, and it will be linking together the numeral and the nominal, the noun. Okay, and then optional classifiers on that view just come out down to the expression of that noun measure head. It is null, as it is always in English, or it can be also pronounced overtly, as in the case for the Turkish tane. So all of this makes sense and it works within a particular way of thinking, but ultimately we still have these two outstanding issues. The numerals are number denoting and linked to nouns via a noun measure, as in 17a, or the numerals are predicates and they modify nouns directly. Both of those can be supported and are supported with analysis of individual languages, and they could very well be working for the analysis of, let's say, English or Bulgarian or other languages. And so part of the goal of my talk is to say, well, in a way, we have both available. We see both instantiated pretty much universally, right? I mean, after we focus on languages without obligatory classifiers, but the option in 70b is fairly restricted, and we'll see a way in which it is restricted. Okay, so now I will focus precisely, specifically on languages without obligatory classifiers, and the bulk of my talk will be about them. And we'll talk about the plural versus singular nominal number that we see in this domain. We'll talk about splits between high and low numerals within noun classes, and the adjective-like versus determiner numerals. So here it is, nominal number in structures with numerals. All these languages don't have obligatory classifiers, so different from Mandarin in that sense. All of them have plural marking, but only in English is this plural marking obligatory. In Hungarian, even though you have the plural marking, you cannot say 5 ships. And in Western Armenian, you can say both 2 boys and also 2 boy, you have an optionality. So what is that about? And the bulk of the literature that has discussed this topic of the typological variation has focused on those 3 patterns, like English versus Hungarian, Turkish is like Hungarian, Estonian and Finnish are like Hungarian, and then Western Armenian with the variation. However, the cross-linguistic variation extends beyond those three patterns. In particular, we have something, a numeral split. I call it the high versus low numerals. And so, for instance, in Arabic, transdecimal numerals, the numerals that are 10 and above, combined with plural nouns. So that's actually a typo. So it's the 3 to 10, right, with a below the decimal that combine with plural nouns, and the numerals above combine. Correct. The transdecimals above 10 combined with singular, below 10 combined with plural in Arabic. So you have to say 3 engineers plural, but 30 engineers singular. And then we have languages like the Slavic languages, Russian, Ukrainian, Polish, Bosnian, Serbo-Croatian, where 2, 3, and 4 combine with singular nouns, although that has been a little bit controversial, but crucially not plural, whereas 5 and 9 combine with plural nouns. So again, a high-low numeral split, but different in its details from what happens in Arabic, and crucially in a different way. So the low numerals here are singular, the high plural. In Arabic, it was the other way around. The low numerals were plural, the high numerals were singular. And then we have further variation. We have split according to the noun class. So an example that is given in the literature, sometimes this is a much less discussed pattern from a language like Mia. So if you have an animate noun like goat, you have to say 10 goats plural. You cannot say singular, the goat needs to be plural. But if you have an inanimate noun, then you can have singular or you can have plural, you have variation. And then also in Slavic languages, we see that. So for instance, in Bulgarian, masculine, and particular in the normative grammar, masculine non-human nouns like chair, appear in a form that I have previously analyzed as being an accusative singular form. The analysis is a little bit controversial. Some people say it is a special kind of a plural. Importantly, it's different from the plural that we see in 24a, which is there for feminine and for neuter nouns. And then in Russian, we also have, in addition to the high-low, to the numeral split, we also have a noun class split. So the animate nouns, as in 25a, 2 tigers, appears in the plural, the genitive plural, although there is a syncretism, and the animate nouns, the inanimate nouns, like 2 counters, appears in the genitive singular. So we have both a high-low numeral split and a noun class split based on animacy in Russian. I don't have a whole lot of time to devote on the prior approaches to variation in nominal number to give them credit, but I will just touch up on their main claims so that you can then see how what I'm suggesting, what it adds to the analytical options. So one very influential account says that what we see, the plural on 2 cats, is not interpretable. 2 cats is plural only as the result of syntactic agreement. There is a high plural feature within the noun phrase. It makes the noun plural, although it is not really semantically plural. And in fact, under Yorin and Matushansky's approach, it must be interpreted as singular. So there is this mismatch between the nominal number that we hear, right, or see, and the number that is actually interpreted. And another approach says, no, this plural on the noun is really interpretable. When we see something that looks like it is singular, when we see 2 cat in Turkish or in Hungarian or in Finnish, it is because those singular marked nouns are actually number neutral. So they have weakly plural reference. They allow both atoms and also plural individuals. And then a third approach is to say singular number is really encoded higher than the numeral, but what varies is the semantics of singular number. the English singular means something different from the Turkish singular, for instance. And all of these approaches assume a uniform modifier semantics for numerals, so two directly combining with cats. So what I would like to suggest instead is that we have two measure heads. So I'll call them unimaginatively measure 1 and measure 2. Measure 1 combines with semantically weakly plural predicates and gives us their cardinality, as in 26. Measure 2 combines with semantically singular or atomic predicates and pluralizes them. This is given in 27. So they have different requirements of what they combine with. Measure 1 says, give me something that is plural. Measure 2 says, give me something that is singular, right, semantically, but also morphosyntactically, as I will see. And they have the same output because at the point in which they combine with the numeral, they have pretty much the same semantics. And so they can combine with the very same numeral. So what this approach will allow us, it will allow us to account for the basically 5 types of languages that we see, and also variation within languages. Languages where numerals combine with necessarily plural nouns will have a measure 1 head. Languages that combine necessarily with a singular, like Turkish, Estonian, Finnish, will have necessarily only measure 2. Languages like Russian, where we see variation, will have both, and will be able to further constrain this variation in order to account for the high-low numeral split and also for the noun class split. And so this is the idea. English, Western Armenian have the structure in 21a with a measure 1 selecting for a plural noun phrase. Hungarian, Turkish, Finnish, Western Armenian. Western Armenian has both structures, that's why the optionality. They have the structure in 29b, necessarily singular because they have measure 2. And then this accounts for the type 1, type 2, type 3 that we started with, always singular, always plural, optionality of plural and singular. And then in terms of the numeral splits, so the languages like Russian, Ukrainian, Polish, BCS, they have a semantic restriction on the numeral argument. Their measure 2 phrase is as in 30. It says, restrict my numeral argument to 2, 3, and 4. I don't work with other numerals. In Arabic, it's the same type of restriction, a semantic restriction, except it is a different one. It says the numerals between 3 and 9. This is what I combine with. Their measure 1, because it's the plural one that is restricted in Arabic. So this is the numeral splits, and then the noun class splits. In Bulgarian, here the measure 2 or measure 1 could impose morphosyntactic restrictions on the nominal argument. So in Bulgarian, measure 1 says, I combine with like plural nouns. I don't put any restrictions on the noun class. But measure 2 says I need to combine with masculine and in the normative grammar, masculine non-human nouns. So it's a morphosyntactic restriction. I need to combine with those. And we also have a noun class split in Russian. So it will, right? So when we have inanimates, we have with the vocal low numerals, we have the genitive singular. With the higher ones, we have the genitive plural. And so in Russian, the restriction will be measure 2 selects for inanimate nouns, in addition to its semantic restriction. And so measure 1 in Russian will say I combine with plurals. Measure 2 in Russian will say I need to combine with inanimate nouns. And moreover, those inanimate nouns need to be singular. And in addition, measure 2 is also going to have its numeral restriction to 3 and 4. And so that's how we account for the number splits. There is the issue of case, as you have seen in many of the languages we discussed, like the Slavic languages, also Estonian and Finnish. The numeral is associated with case mark noun. Here we can say that the Bulgarian, for instance, measure 2, in addition to its selection to masculine non-human nouns, also hosts an accusative case feature. So accusative case feature in the case of 36b, this is why we have 35b, 5 chairs showing up as accusative singular. But 5 tables, which is feminine, shows up as plural, no case marking, because its syntax is derived by measure 1. And then in the Slavic languages with vocal systems, both measure 1 and measure 2 host a genitive case feature. And so let's say in Russian, the 37a, 3 chairs, is derived with measure 2 in 38b. So measure 2 selects for inanimate and is associated with the genitive case feature. So it's the measure 2 that assigns the case to the nominal. Measure 1 also has a genitive case feature, and it also assigns it to the noun. The numerals themselves don't assign the case, right? It's the functional heads that are associated, that link the numerals. Okay, so we saw essentially 5 types of patterns, variations in the expression of numerals and nouns in languages without obligatory classifiers. So noun is always plural, noun is always singular, noun can be plural or singular. There is a split between numerals. High numerals do one thing, low numerals combine with a different number. And there is also a noun class split. Let's say the masculine nouns do singular, whereas all the other nouns are plural, or some other variations in terms of animacy, for instance. The last addition to the account is then we also have high and low number. So number is interpreted whenever we see it. It is never there just because it is syntactic agreement. And there are 2 loci of number within the noun phrase. One below the numeral, one above the numeral. Both of them are interpreted, and moreover, they can be different. So for instance, in 39, this is 5 chairs in Bulgarian. It's masculine, that's why it needs to be accusative singular. So singular number says, I give you a predicate of atomic individuals, of single chairs. Measure 2 pluralizes that, says, I'll start with this predicate of atomic individuals, and I'll give you a predicate of those atomic individuals and their sums. And this will be the actually the semantics of measure 2. And then 5 will restrict that set to those pluralities that have a set of 5 members. And then another second feature on top, a plural feature, will reflect the fact that we are dealing with a plural, semantically plural noun phrase. And so it's importantly that even though we have this mismatch of low singular and high plural, this is possible in structures with measure 2. The measure 2 is the pluralizing head. And this kind of high number will account for the fact that elements that appear higher than the numeral bear plural number. So these 5 chairs in Bulgarian shows up at this is plural, chair is singular. Similarly for Russian, similarly for Estonian. And this also allows for external agreement to at least be plural, if not necessarily only plural. And here is the case of 5 tables, which is the feminine combines with measure 1. the high number value here is derived, is copied from the lower one. So it also will be plural. In effect, what this ends up saying is that in the case of measure 1, we have a single domain for number, even though we have two number phrases, they are necessarily the same and necessarily both of them plural. Whereas in the case of measure 2, we have a split domain. Lower domain is singular, higher domain is plural. Okay, the link with measure expressions. What is the meaning of all this? So far, those two measure expressions gave us an account of the morphosyntactic variation that we see, and also how it is interpretable compositionally. But why should things be like this? What is the bigger picture? And the bigger picture is there is a constraint on the interpretation of measure phrases that was given to us by Schwarzschild. It's a discovery of his. The fact is that measure phrases appear in two different positions within the noun phrase, and they're linked with a very distant interpretation. So if you say in 50, he ate 2 pounds of cherries versus he ate 2 pound cherries, it's the same measure phrase, 2 pound, that appears. But in the one case in 50A, it measures the total weight of the cherries. In the second case, 50B, it gives us the weight of individual cherries. So the interpretation ends up being this very strange reading where each cherry is so big that it weighs 2 pounds. And there is a systematic link between the syntax, how the measure phrase looks and appears, and how it is interpreted. And the same happens also in the case of adjectives. So he used too much paper. A quantity adjective like much means that the overall quantity of the paper was exceeding whatever needs there were. But he used heavy paper means that each individual piece was a type of heavy paper. So very much how in 50B, we got the weight of individual cherries. And clearly they're associated with two positions within the noun phrase, 2 pounds of 2 pound cherries. The attributive adjectival 2 pound appears directly merged with cherries and lower. The 2 pounds appears necessarily higher above this head, which in English we pronounce of, and which is linked with a monotonicity requirement. The monotonicity requirement is that the regulated property of the dimension of measurement, let's say weight in our case, it has to be a monotonicity on the part-whole relation in the domain that's given by the noun phrase. So 2 pounds of cherries, the syntax of these 2 pounds tells you that the weight of the cherries has to be monotonically linked to the part-whole structure of the cherries. The more cherries we add to the sum, the heavier it will be. The more cherries we subtract, the less heavy they will be. Yeah, that is what monotonicity is. And in the case of 2 pound cherries in 56, this is a non-monotonic interpretation. It gives us the weight of each individual cherry. We may keep adding cherries, the weight of each cherry is not going to change by that. So a very important discovery. So this is how it looks. If you combine with the noun phrase and your adjectival, you can be non-monotonic. If you combine higher above this monotonicity head, you have to yield monotonic interpretation. What does it have to do with singular plural? Well, again, a discovery is that the pseudopartitive measure phrases are prohibited with singular count nouns. They allow plural nouns and mass nouns. You cannot say 2 hours of job. On the other hand, you must say a 2-hour job in 59B or a 2 pound coffee bean. You cannot use here the mass or the mass nouns. And numerals, importantly, pattern with the pseudo-partitive measure phrases and Q adjectives. So he ate 2 pounds of 2-pound cherries. He ate 2-pound or heavy cherries. The numeral appears in the position where the measure phrase 2 pounds of appears, which means that these determiner numerals are subject to the monotonicity constraint. So this is the picture that we end up with, linking the syntax and semantics of numerals to this wider monotonicity constraint, which is a constraint on the semantics of syntactic structures, tells us that we in principle can have 2 types of numerals. A numeral which is determiner-like appears higher as an argument of a monotonic phrase, a phrase that enforces monotonicity, and a numeral that combines directly with the noun phrase and that is interpreted non-monotonically. And indeed, this is what we are seeing in the domains of numerals. Measure 1 and measure 2 that we discussed earlier are instances of this monotonic head of Schwarzschild. They yield semantically plural predicates, both of them satisfying the monotonicity constraint. So the determiner numerals are combining with these measure expressions. They obey the monotonicity constraint. We see that in languages. And now we'll see the link between the syntax of numerals and nominal number. An important discovery has been that numerals like 1, in some languages 2, in some languages 3 and 4 also behave like adjectives. So for instance, in Hebrew, we say cat 1. The numeral appears after cat. All other numerals, including 3 and 2, appear before the noun. We say 3 cats and we say 2 years, but cat 1. And also the numeral 1 shows robust gender agreement with the noun, whereas the other numerals in Hebrew do not show robust agreement. They may, but they don't necessarily do. So syntactically, 1 behaves like an adjective. In Lebanese Arabic, 1 behaves like an adjective. It appears post-nominally. 2 also behaves like an adjective, appears post-nominally. And interestingly, 2 combines with a dual. Whereas in Hebrew, the numeral 2 combines with the plural, and it couldn't combine with the dual. So 64D. Is this a coincidence? I would say no. Because the numeral 2 in Hebrew is a determiner numeral, it must obey monotonicity. And obeying monotonicity means you cannot combine with dual number. The only way that you could combine with dual number, as in Arabic, is to be an adjective. You combine with dual number in Arabic, you're allowed to violate monotonicity because you're an adjective. Yeah. The other numerals like 4 and above, they're determiners. They show the syntax of determiners appearing prenominally, lack of agreement, obeying monotonicity. In Slovenian, which is a Slavic language that has preserved the dual, we see the same thing that we see in Arabic. 2 combines with the dual form and is also an adjective. Patterns differently from, let's say, expressions of numerals like 5, which are determiners and which are associated with case marking on the nouns, with the genitive case. In the case of 2 books, we don't have genitive case, so it behaves like an adjective. Yeah. Whereas adjective 1 behaves universally like adjective in all the languages that we have talked about, certainly in the Slavic languages. So in 67, we see an example from Bulgarian, behaves like an adjective, has robust agreement for all the genders. Even in languages like Finnish, which, remember, always combined with a singular noun. In Finnish, you always say 3 cat or 2 cat. Even in Finnish, and you have partitive case, as in 68b, so 2 small cars, car will be marked partitive, small will be marked partitive, and they will appear singular. Even in Finnish, where the nouns are singular, the numeral 1 behaves exceptionally. It behaves like an adjective. And so it is not associated with partitive case. This is important. We want to capture this. And the way we capture it is again via the monotonicity constraint. Being associated with singular number, unless you have a measure phrase that connects you with the singular number and pluralizes you, is not going to give you preservation of monotonicity. So then the only option you have is to be an adjective. And indeed, Finnish apparently exercises this option. The adjective, the numeral 1 is an adjective. So here is the link, right? Again, in Hebrew, 2 is a determiner, necessarily combines with plural, prohibits the dual. In Finnish, 2 is also a determiner, necessarily combines with measure 2, because measure 2 is the only thing available in Finnish, combines with singular number, okay, obeys monotonicity, because measure 2 pluralizes that singular predicate. In Arabic and Slovenian, 2 is an adjective, does not combine with the measure expression, and is allowed, in fact required, to combine with dual number. Yeah, it doesn't obey monotonicity, it doesn't have to because it's an adjective. And then for Arabic, Hebrew, Slovenian, Russian, Bulgarian, Finnish, 1 is an adjective, combines with singular number without the mediation of any measure expression. The question we ask at this point, does it have to be this way? Why is 1 forced to always be a numeral, be an adjective? Whereas 2, we saw, was allowed to be a determiner, at least in languages like Hebrew and Finnish. And the answer seems to be that lies in the higher number phrase. Remember, we said that in the languages that we're discussing, in structures where the measure 2, where the number is singular, the higher phrase is necessarily plural. But that's not going to work with 1, because if we have 1 cat, this will be incompatible with the higher plural number. So it is this higher plural number that prevents the numeral 1 from being a determiner in languages like Russian, Ukrainian, Bulgarian, Slovenian, etc. However, if the high number could be singular, and it is never singular in Russian or Finnish, if it could be singular, then 1 could be a determiner. The structure in 73 is interpretable. And possibly Hungarian is a language that instantiates this structure. The numeral 1 there seems to behave completely unexceptionally, combines optionally with classifiers, doesn't behave like an adjective. And interestingly, Hungarian always exhibits singular agreement outside of the numeral phrase. Okay, to sum up, we looked at the question of how the syntax of the numerals, whether they behave like adjectives or whether they behave more like determiners, is linked to the nominal number, whether the noun is singular or plural or dual. It's not anything goes. There is a tight link. The determiner numerals may combine with plural marked nouns. It means they're combining via measure 1. Determiner numerals may combine with singular marked nouns. This means they're combining with measure 2. Only adjectival 1 may combine with singular marked nouns without a measure expression, attributively, because attributive structures are not subject to the monotonicity constraint. Only adjectival 2 may combine with dual marked nouns, again for the same reason, because attributive structures are not subject to the monotonicity constraint. Okay, I'll end my conclusions of the talk. Numerals, we see both adjective-like numerals, a few of them, 1, possibly 2, possibly 3 and 4 in languages like Slovenian. They have modifier semantics. They directly combine with the noun phrase. The rest of the numerals are determiners. They have number denoting semantics, and they need to combine with either singular or plural noun phrases. They cannot combine with a dual. And which one they combine is regulated by which of those two types of noun measure heads is available in the language. Nominal number is always interpretable, and we have two number heads. Twice, we're interpreting number twice inside the noun phrase, once below the numeral, once above the numeral. Why does the grammar of numerals, like two cats, look like this? Because it is part of a larger constraint on syntax and semantics, on the interpretation of measure structures, namely the monotonicity constraint. And so we end up by the realization that even after we sort of put aside the macro variation of not having precise numbers, having obligatory classifiers, even languages that don't have obligatory classifiers, you say two cats, you don't see much else, even they have a whole wide range of variation that is in this space, but it's not a variation that is unconstrained. It is constrained very tightly with the syntax and semantics working together. Thank you.
Thank you. This is fascinating. I suggest that we come back for discussion. People can turn their cameras on and raise the little hand or the real hand if you'd like to ask something.
Ružica, I think I see your hand. I hope I'm pronouncing your name.
No, it's just clapping.
Oh, it's just clapping.
Yeah.
Okay.
Clapping.
Thank you.
Also using their hands for clapping. So let's give people a couple minutes. And are there any comments or questions yet? Maybe unshare your screen so we can all see each other.
Should I stop sharing?
Yeah, might as well. We can always go back if we have to, if we want to.
A larger picture.
Pierre, go
I
ahead.
see
Yes,
your hand
Rumi,
up.
you take your own questions. It's fine.
Pierre? You're muted.
Yes, I have a very general question. As I'm sure you, well, as I think you are aware, in the article I wrote with Stanislas Dehaene and others in Science about Munduruku numbers, the idea was that well, we did not extend a linguistic analysis, but if we would have, I think the idea was that there is a different interface. So the idea was that number in Munduruku express the number sense, that is that they have an approximate meaning, so they are not exact. Mm-hmm. And at least my idea was that this was an interface phenomena, and that language was linked in a way that needs to be studied with the approximate number systems that we share with other animals, mm-hmm. as opposed to the exact number system that is human specific. So how does the very interesting talk that you just gave relate to that? Yes.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I mean, the work has very much been an inspiration for me, and that's why I really wanted to start with a language like Munduruku that does not have precise numbers, because the way I see this is that, just like you said, as humans, we come equipped with an approximate number sense, because pretty much all animals that have been studied have that. But the point is that only we have language. And so what is the interface? Presumably, we have concepts that are cross-linguistically, the hand, the body parts, languages adopt those as their roots to build a number system on. The point is, the language, for whatever reason, has not formed roots that are precise numbers. So it very much has a lexicon that has these approximate numbers. So the numerals that I had quoted there, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, they're not precise numerals, just like you said in your work. They're really lexical items that match to approximate numbers. So 1 means approximately 1. Yeah. So we have this approximate number system conceptually, and as humans, we have lexical items to express the concepts that we have, right? And so it's not surprising that the language will have lexical items that express approximate number concepts, but it doesn't have roots that mean the number 2, right? That was the point. This is how I view it. And it's, as always, these questions are fascinating. How do we link our cognition, non-linguistic cognition, to our lexicon and to our grammar? But importantly, again, the point I want to sort of emphasize with the rest of the talk is that there is a tightly constrained syntax and semantics that operates with these precise numbers. And it has the rules that it does. Yeah. I don't know whether that answers your question. So these words in Munduruku are very much lexical items that denote something, but what they denote is imprecise, approximate numbers. Yeah.
Yes.
And that's a system that we all have.
Yes, with the exception of one, but
exception of one? What is that?
Yes. I just mentioned this in case it's interesting to you. But if you look at the picture in the science article,
yeah.
It's something that is very surprising to me. You will notice that all numbers are approximate, with the exception of one. Which is something that surprised me.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. We have to double check because I might, but I'm almost sure that what I'm saying is correct. I have always been puzzled by that. So we have to double check because it was in 2004 and it's already a long time ago. But I think that one is, or it might be, in fact, that two is exceptional. And I'm wondering, so with the exception of two, let's say, so one is approximate, but two is not. So, and I was wondering, why this is so. There is also something that is linked to what you said, and I don't want to monopolize the discussion, but in fact, the structure of number words in Munduruku is very special. And is very reminiscent of dual, trial, and a conjunction of two duals. How does this relate to your analysis? And also numbers in Munduruku are using classifiers to be related to the noun. And I was wondering also, how does this relate?
Yeah, I mean, I have not looked into Munduruku specifically beyond essentially your work, right?
Yes.
And moreover, I mean, I represent it here because that's how I understood it to be, that all of those are approximate, including 1 and 2. So I will need to recheck and maybe talk.
Yeah, no, you can. There is a very nice picture that is telling.
Yeah.
And so it's not difficult to double check that.
I teach that stuff.
Yes.
So yes. So, but the point is right. I mean, clearly, a grammar of precise numbers is learnable, right? And so you have to then do something with the tools that you have. And so presumably a classifier option is one option that natural language provides us. Like we have all these classifier languages. So that's a very interesting question on its own, but I don't have anything specific to say. But thank you.
Okay, I'm going to leave other people ask questions. If we have time, I'm going to ask some more.
Thank you. Okay. I think Masha, I saw your hand.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, Rumi.
Hi.
Thanks for the talk. I want to preface my question by 2 caveats. One is all this is very far remote from what I have worked on, so I've never worked on any of that, so I don't know anything about that, and that has been a conscious choice, right? Because these things in Russian scare me. I can use them as a native Russian speaker, but I don't want to think about them as a linguist. And the second caveat is that I kept occasionally tuning out during your talk, not because your talk was not interesting, but because I kept thinking about Russian data. So I might have missed. You might have said something about this, or maybe you said that you don't want to say anything about that. So apologize in advance if I missed something relevant in your talk. But I wanted to ask about adjectives within numeral constructions, and something that I find puzzling about Russian with adjectives is that, as far as I can tell, for masculine and neuter nouns, if you have an adjective with low numbers, right, within a numeral construction, you're going to get to the same agreement as you would with high numbers on the adjective. So you would have два деревянных стола, right? 2 wooden tables. So table is singular or plural or whatever it is, but the adjective will have the same form as you would have with 6 wooden tables.
Right. It will be plural.
Exactly. And then with feminine, I could actually go either way. For me, it's free variation, right? Yeah. So for low numbers, I can say две интересные книги or две интересных книги, right? So it can be special form, or it can be the same as with high numerals. So what is going on there? Why is this happening, and how do we capture this?
Yeah, no, this is an excellent question, and that has been sort of one of the main motivation for people who have worked in this domain to come up with different analyses, because this is extremely challenging. Notice that Finnish or Estonian don't do that. So in Finnish, where the nouns are always singular, so 2 book, 5 book, whatever, the noun will be singular and partitive. An adjective that modifies the noun below the numeral will also be singular and partitive. So 2 red car, red will be singular and partitive. And so Finnish and Estonian behave very nicely. You have lower domain where we have singular number, we have higher domain above the numeral where we have plural number, and the adjectives reflect that concord. Russian, precisely why you said, for the reasons you said, it's not that. Even though you have singular or plural or however you analyze that form, the adjective appears to be plural. So what I think is going on is that in this lower domain, we don't have the same kind of concord that we have in the higher domain. It is not pass up the gender features and the number features within that domain and then agree with them. Because if that was the case, we'll just have masculine, feminine, whatever, and then singular. Instead, in this lower domain, measure 2 in Russian is saying, I am selecting for an inanimate feature, and it is the animacy feature, not the gender feature that's participating in concord on the adjective. And Russian does not have items that express animacy and number separate from gender. And if you don't have gender on the adjective, then you have to default to plural.
Mhm.
And so that is my current understanding of this.
Interesting.
I hope it makes sense. And then in the domain for the feminines, what is going on is that in Russian, just like in pretty much all these other languages, the system is changing. This variation in the feminines is because of change in progress. Something similar is happening in Bulgarian. Like what I'm describing, right, is a normative grammar says masculine non-humans. The colloquial grammar, all masculines allow this. So there is
I
this
see.
variation, which also in Bulgarian, also in Russian, is a change in progress.
I see. Thank you.
Thanks.
Other questions or comments? I actually have one myself, but I don't want to make sure that everyone's gotten a chance. So, and it is, as you mentioned, there's some technical aspects here, and I just wanted to clarify. It was back on slide. It's also about the weirdness of these Russian in between cases, but in a different sense than Masha's question about the adjectives. So it's back on slide. I took a note of the slide 29. It's the sort of the genitive case aspect of the 2-3 and of the, yeah. So it's slide 29. Yeah. So, right. Yes. So it has the phrase host, the measure 1 and the measure 2 host a genitive case feature. So by that, but I'm a little curious what it means to host a genitive case feature, because at the same time, as you correctly point out, 37 is in nominative or accusative, actually, because they're syncretic case contexts. So when you say it hosts a genitive case feature, that has to do with what happens on Stalov or Stala.
Yes.
But
exactly.
it's not what happens to Pyat and 3 themselves.
Itself, no.
Right. So, and I get that. I think you can get that. But how do we? But then, you, as you know, well, when the whole phrase is the object of a oblique assigning preposition, that genitive case feature is suddenly non-active. And the whole, so if you say with 5 tables, as you know, or with 3 tables, they both go into the instrumental plural from with.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
what is the nature of host a genitive case feature, and how does it get, I mean, this is the classic Babby.
Yes, yeah. This is very much the classic question.
Tchaikovsky problem.
And so,
do you have a way to,
So when I say host, I mean assign this case. Assigns it to the nominal below it. And so both measure phrases in Russian with the pocal numerals assign, sorry, not pocal numerals. I mean, both pocal and non-pocal, all of them assign genitive case. However, this is only in contexts of nominative and accusative, only in structural context. And this is exactly the same phenomenon as in Finnish and Estonian. There it's the same thing. The measure phrase or the numerals associated with the measure phrase are associated with partitive case on the noun only in nominative and accusative context. Once you put them in the obliques, dative, instrumental, whatever, the whole thing becomes that case. And so for Estonian, I think it's an easier question basically what you say is that the oblique case outranks partitive case there in the morphosyntactic expression, right? That's one way to say it. This case, the measure in Finnish will assign partitive case to the noun, but that partitive case has no chance of being realized once the whole phrase has been assigned dative. So dative will overrule the partitive. That's one way to say it. And you could say the same thing for Russian. So Finnish is easier than Russian because the number stays singular. So you have 5 tables in a nominative context. Tables is singular, 5 table, and partitive. You put it in a dative context, table stays singular, but becomes dative. So number is preserved. In Russian, the strange thing is that the number becomes plural in the dative and all the other cases. So the way I see it is that this measure 2 is only allowed in structural case contexts. In non-structural case context, you only have measure 1 available. So lots of restriction on this measure 2.
I see.
It selects an inanimate, it selects a vocal numeral, and it only shows up in direct contexts.
Right. So you need that restriction, but that doesn't seem, I mean, it depends on how you want to state that restriction, because yeah, so how, I mean, if you're thinking really in terms of case as a feature, which is how you talked about it here in terms of it's assigning the genitive there.
Right.
If you think of it as a feature, then it's still the question of what is like, so is it also hosting in the other sense is also being valued for a feature? And then what is the nature of a restriction that says a structural case is the only kind of thing that it can be valued for? Or what is that versus an oblique case? I mean, do we have a feature system that can handle the distinction between structural case?
Yeah,
because it's a syntactic phenomenon, not a...
No, it's entirely syntactic. This is an entirely syntactic phenomenon. And also verging on the morphosyntax, right? The realization of those, it's not just the features themselves. And so, so possibly, right, one idea is you cannot simultaneously be a case assigner and receive case. That could be, I don't know. Another thing could be fine. Now there are these 2 case features right next to one another. Realize only one of them and only the one that's higher on a ranking. And as you know, right, there are these ideas that cases are contained in one another. So genitive case is contained in dative case, it's contained in whatever is on top. And so you always express the higher one. So that's another idea that happens. I think for Finnish, both of those things will work. For Russian, in addition, you have to say the syntactic head itself is not allowed to be there, not just the feature on it. Right?
Right.
And so that's why, right, the previous analysis, I mean, as you know, have said in one case, the numeral is the head assigning the case. In another case, the numeral is a specifier, something else, right, assigns the case. So these are the space of options. I think this opens up another way of looking at it, allows us to describe a whole range of things, separate, tell us which are the properly syntactic, which are the semantic. Ultimately, what kind of thing is this? I don't know. Why is this measure head only allowed in structural case contexts? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Any other comments, questions? I know there was a request that if you are willing to send us your slides, that we can share them with everybody.
Sure.
And there is another comment in the chat. I don't know if you want to take a look at that. For last, let's call it the last question. And maybe unshare your screen too, if you get a chance.
Hold on. Let me stop sharing. Okay. They could be, the ideas could be extended to a course paper on number in Thai Kadai languages. There'll be nothing I would love more than to see work on more languages. So I've been, as I said, I teach this stuff both at my institutions and also at summer schools. And I'm extremely happy, and it has happened that several students have sort of gotten ideas from that and done work on numeral systems, including a whole range of things. I mean, how do decimals work? How do like fractions work? A whole lot can be done here. Thank you, Anya. So if you could follow up, I would be interested to see what happens.
Maybe you want to put your email in the chat if you're willing, so that the students could just be directly in touch with you, who might want to.
Sure.
That would be great.
It's a very easy email.
Great. Thank you. And thank you all for coming. Thank you, Rumi. This was fascinating.
Thank you.
Fantastic. We'll see you all. As you know, the